Ahoy, this is David Perry with my continuing series of interviews with colleagues and friends around the world, how they are going from the great pause into the great return. Today, I'm very pleased to have with me a friend and colleague, someone I made because of COVID, so there is a silver lining in some way to everything. Please welcome Fiona Pelham from Positive Impact Events, speaking to us from beautiful Copenhagen. How are you this morning?
I am very good. Yes. Beautiful Copenhagen's a little bit rainy today, but apart from that, it's a great location.
Right. Well, for those of you who do not have the pleasure of knowing you or meeting you for the first time here, talk to us a little bit about your company, Positive Impact Events. And then also, I mean, that's not a Scandinavian accent. How a nice British girl ended up in Scandinavia.
Yes, so I am originally from Manchester in the UK, and I'll start with how I ended up in Scandinavia first and then explain what I do. Back in 2016, I was international chair of the board for Meeting Professionals International, which is the biggest global association for meeting professionals. And I spent a year finding myself often one of the only women in a room of conversations with men, and I found myself very drained. Now, Manchester is the home of where the suffragettes stood up to the right for voting. And I realized that to be a strong female leader in the world, I wanted to live somewhere where I could see gender equality in place. So I did a little tour of Scandinavia, loved Copenhagen. I love the fact that at 4 o'clock it's bike rush hour and you see as many men as women biking kids back from school. So that was why I ended up moving over here. And what I do is I run a not-for-profit, which is all about creating a sustainable event industry. And I have been doing that since 2005. So it's a very interesting time for that conversation right now.
Yeah, and of course, having spent a little bit of time in Copenhagen, you're right, it is a beautiful, beautiful city where you can't have a bike rush hour. I mean, going into the realm of producing, conceptualizing sustainable events in the early 2000s, the whole world was talking about climate change. Then, of course, we came upon COVID. How has COVID impacted that conversation, but also the reality of how do you do an event in a world when no one wants to get together?
It's really interesting. So I think that we are opening up a brand new conversation around what an event actually is. And while we're facing COVID, it's a crisis of health, but we also have a crisis of climate and a crisis of inequality and economics going on. And I think the opportunity the event industry has is to really think about the equality piece and think about when we do an event, who are we doing it for? Who has the opportunity to be included and involved? And when you start to rethink that, when you start to think, what is this event actually about? And how could the biggest impact be made? You're going to start thinking differently about what the event looks like. Right now, there is a whole industry built around the logistics of a face-to-face event. And I don't know if in the future we will ever return to that way of behavior. And there are two reasons really, and you have to stop me if I'm just talking too much about the content and you want to take it bit by bit. But the two main reasons I think is the inequality conversation. You could say that the event industry has existed for extroverts or for people that could get themselves to an event, and that hasn't included everybody in the world. And then also the climate change piece. Now, we know that the world's policies, the world's commitments are all around reducing our impact in terms of plastics, in terms of carbon emissions. And when you break down the logistics of a face-to-face event, there are really too many impacts that we're having without enough evidence of the results. And there's just one final thing I'll say at this point is, I believe in events. I believe in the power of face-to-face and human connection. I have done since I was born, and I will until I die. And that doesn't mean clinging to a model that was used pre-COVID. There's a new future out there for our industry around human connection, and we just have to create it.
Right now, so you said that you don't think we'll go back to face-to-face connections. You mean in no way or just in a different way?
I think in a different way. So there are so many factors going on, and there is all the health factors, and I won't dwell too much on that because I am not a health expert at all, but I think it's very obvious for all of us that some people will feel comfortable around lots of people and others won't. We've also had a period where we've been learning to engage and connect in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll bring this back to that.
Present experience included.
Exactly. We've never met.
We've never met, but I feel like I know you. We met
exactly
on a Zoom call.
And we met through doing a hackathon, which is a short amount of time when you are creating something. So it's very quickly you build trust, very quickly. I remember actually very quickly having to be in what I would call very direct conversation with you, saying, David, can you do this by this time? Because we didn't have enough time to be like, oh, David, what's your hobby? No. But we had a shared goal. And I think this is what we can't overlook. As humans, we're learning new ways to connect. And one of those ways is if you have a shared goal, you can build that trust and build that vulnerability and create something together in a way that maybe we didn't know was possible.
So do you think that we might, I mean, I've thought about this several times. I mean, all the people I met during that hackathon, with the exception of David Kleiman, I've never actually been in the room with. I've been in the Zoom room with.
Yeah.
About the day that actually I'll walk in a room and maybe actually give Fiona a hug or a elbow bump or whatever it is. But the relationship will already have started in a way that if we hadn't had COVID, we would have felt like, oh, well, maybe I'm going to talk to Fiona on a Zoom, but I won't get to know her until I meet her.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing you put forward there, because you're almost suggesting, had our human brains been putting barriers in the way of building connections non-face-to-face? And I think they had, and I think without doubt our brains do different things when we're in front of a screen rather than when we are face-to-face. And that's everything from the body language to the eye contact, everything. And I just don't think as humans we've experimented to see how we can go beyond that. In fact, in September, we're doing an experiment with 40 corporate companies where we're exploring how human connection happens. So one of the things we're doing on the experiment is we have a professional ballerina who is going to do some work in terms of everyone using their body at the same time, and then see how connected do we feel when we've all had that experience.
And is this something that you're producing through Positive Impact Events?
That's right, it is, yes. We have invited 40 people along, and we're going to be producing a report afterwards.
In September. So I look forward to that report. So I don't have a tutu, so I imagine I'm not the ballerina dancer. But
no. And the other interesting thing that we're doing with that initiative is before the exploring starts, we are finding out everybody's personality types so that we can understand if who we are as a person affects who we are in how we connect to each other. So.
Fascinating. And how are you doing that? An Enneagram or something like that?
It is the Enneagram. Yeah. Yes.
I think if I recall, it's been a while since I did it, but I think once I was called a P with Z tendencies or something. I don't know, but I'll have to do it again. Well,
the Enneagram, I have a little theory that everybody who loves events is an Enneagram 7 because they are the enthusiasts. And I wouldn't be surprised if you were a 7. Because
I'm sure I'm a 7. 7's always been my lucky number, so there you go.
But they're people that love trying something new and exploring, and they're always curious. So you can imagine that they are probably the ones that have spent time at events.
Right. So even though we may be a while before we have face-to-face events, you think we will once again get in a room with a lot of people for events? You don't think we're going to completely become a virtual planet?
Well, I think at this moment, I would say I don't know. I would like to think that the future of the event industry is event professionals that really think about the why for the meeting. Now, there is definitely going to be some whys that hundreds of people should come together. There is going to be reasons for that, and then that should happen. But there's also probably many times where that doesn't need to happen. And again, if every event professional was trained in, okay, so this meeting is about building trust. This is 10 high-level people. They have never met. It's a very confidential meeting. That sounds like a face-to-face. This meeting is thousands of people that love a certain thing, have never met, will probably never meet afterwards. That could be done in smaller hubs or elements of virtual. I would like to think that the event industry will never say this should be face-to-face and this shouldn't be face-to-face. Right. I would like to think that we are always curious and exploring how we're connecting as humans.
Right. Well, the economic impact of this and the socialization impact of this are not only going to be enormous, they're happening now.
Yes.
What is it like planning in the midst of a pandemic? And it's kind of a rhetorical question. I ask myself that every day.
And Positive Impact Events, we provide education, engagement, and collaboration to create a sustainable event industry. So we don't plan face-to-face events. Interestingly, due to COVID, we have planned a lot of virtual gatherings and conversations. And I think that's what planning is now turning into, just however people come together, plan that. There was a point I wanted to make before, which is just completely gone.
That's all right. I mean, the whole discussion about events and gatherings is, of course, central to the COVID experience, because in a sense, going to a restaurant with friends is an event. Going to a birthday party is an event. Going to a press conference is an event. Getting on public transit is an event. And all these events are now potentially life-threatening until we have a cure or a vaccine.
Yeah, and you asked before about the economics around that. And this is something else that is fascinating and also very challenging. So we're at a point of world change where certain economies aren't working. So the last event I went to was MPI's European Meeting and Events Conference, and UNFCCC, who are the Climate Change Secretariat from the UN, they spoke and they said, there is potentially no future to this industry because we have carbon targets around the world. And every country and city and business is signing up to these targets. And right now, when you fly in a plane, carbon is used. And at that time in February, the industry didn't want to hear that there was an end in sight for the industry.
They kept the American analogy is kicking the ball down the field.
Yeah, because the economics of our industry was such that money comes from bringing people together in one place after they have traveled. Now, that has all stopped. And it's giving us, not just me and you, but also all the big businesses in the world, the chance to look at what is the future of business. And during COVID, the companies who had the strongest environmental sustainability governance reporting have done the best because they are set for the future.
They weren't just a company that was saying, well, we'll just do a carbon buyback.
Exactly. They were structuring around what the future looks like.
So COVID has fast-tracked a lot of sustainability goals.
Well, yes, it has. And I think it's given us an excuse to play around in the space of what it could look like. I think I'd pause when you say it's fast-tracked the goals because there's still so far for us to go. And also there is still the potential that we go back to the bad behavior. But future good economic models are all going to be in line with policies that we need as a world body. So as humans living on this planet, there are some things we should really pay attention to. How much water and air do we have? And what are the policies around making sure that we keep having water and air? And if we can build our businesses around those policies, then everyone succeeds.
So maybe one of the silver linings of COVID, beside the death count has just been horrible. So much misery in the world, human misery, economic misery, but out of everything that's painful, we should be able to learn something. So maybe we will learn about how to have a more sustainable economy.
Absolutely. And then I think the other silver lining that I can really see for the event industry is what we were talking about before, inclusion in conversations. So there are sustainable development goals. These are 17 goals, which are all about making the world work for everyone. And there is one goal about participatory and inclusive decision-making. In other words, everybody being involved in the making of decisions. Now, we have seen in the last few months real protests and cries for change around inequality. And I think most people within the event industry would be able to look at their events and say, you know what, there is more I could do to be inclusive and to enable participatory decision-making. Imagine if the event industry was seen as the industry that enabled inclusion and enabled participation in decisions. That's an amazing future for the industry.
In our last few moments, talk to me about what is it like now here in summer 2020 in Copenhagen. I've had conversations recently with friends and colleagues in Greece, in India, in the United Kingdom. I speak with my family in Spain and friends in Italy every day. And of course, Italy and Spain were the first epicenters in Europe of COVID. And now here we are in the United States. I'm speaking to you from California, and we're very much in the middle of it. How are things in Copenhagen?
Well,
what's it look like on the streets, and how do people get around?
Well, on the streets, it looks very like it was February, or it looks like it was last summer. We don't wear masks. Denmark closed down very quickly when they decided to. So the children stayed back from school, and I don't speak enough Danish to understand this, but one of my friends told me that when the Prime Minister said, we are closing everything down, she also said, and we're Danish, so don't hoard when you go to the shops, because that's not what we do. And my experience living in the center of Copenhagen throughout lockdown, we could always go outside, we could always walk around, the supermarkets were always well stocked, and now we're seeing tourists from surrounding countries come back in, and it's interesting because I've got used to having the city of Copenhagen almost to myself. So there are times when I look around and there's all these tourists and people on the streets, and I think, whoa, this isn't the Copenhagen I've got used to. So yeah, it's interesting seeing it. But my experience of living in Copenhagen is that people are very respectful, very organized, very tidy. So I feel very fortunate that this has been where I've been through this experience.
Oh, great. Any closing thoughts before we sign off?
I would say that there is a huge opportunity in the future for event professionals, for people that love the thought of human connection and making that happen. And there is change ahead. And as human beings, we're not so good at change. So if any event professionals are listening, I would say, read all the books you can about change, arm yourself with as many tools as you can around change, because there's a potential amazing future for you, but it's just going to look different to the past.
Great. We've been speaking with Fiona Pelham of Positive Impacts Events, and that's positiveimpactevents.com, correct?
That's right, yes.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure. I look forward to speaking to you, and actually one day re-meeting you, maybe in a room that's not virtual, but until then, it's a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Ahoy.